Hey guys, let's talk about sex. Sex after having a baby, it might be like the best thing you've ever experienced, or it might be the worst sex you have ever had. It probably took me a good 6 months to really get back into having sex after having my son. My husband and I, we started trying again probably about 8 weeks postpartum, and while it didn't hurt, it also felt really different. um my vagina was obviously a lot bigger than it had been before having a baby. It was more dry. My boobs suddenly felt like they belonged to motherhood, and it felt weird to have my husband touch them. Um, and our time for sex was also severely limited, not surprisingly. We became really good at quickies and kind of doing it wherever we could. And sure, I had some orgasms in those first few months, but I had to really work hard for them. It was so hard for my body to get there for a lot of reasons, but I think one of the big ones is that my mind was just so consumed with thoughts of my baby, and that just made it really hard to orgasm, to be in the moment, to allow myself to feel that pleasure. And I kind of felt like a sex fraud. Like like I was pretending to want sex and be into it, but really I was just thinking about when I should pump next. I don't know. I just wasn't good at it. And with all that said, I'm glad that I made myself, regularly engage in sex in those first few months, because even if I didn't have rolling orgasms, I did feel more connected to my husband during and after sex. And regularly engaging in it helped me really ease back into a space where I enjoyed it. We eventually found a new groove. We found new positions that felt good. My hormones balanced out, and I wasn't as dry down there. And we tried extended foreplay, which helped me. I needed to ease into it slower. And going back to the hormones and vaginal lubrication, luckily that fixed itself on its own. But if it didn't, I would not have been opposed to lube. Okay, there's nothing wrong with needing some lube. And I had to make my boobs off limits for a while, because they were pretty much always leaking. They just felt messy and sore, and I just eventually had to tell my husband we can have sex, but just don't touch my boobs for a while. It pulls me out of the moment. And once they chilled out, they became a fun part of sex again, but they just needed a little break. And we also, continued to get more and more flexible with the timing of sex. The evening was not really an option anymore, because I'd be putting the baby down and I'd be so exhausted, I would pretty much always fall asleep when I was putting the baby down. And I was just too tired to do anything but just lay around. And so the afternoon, it became the golden time for getting in some nookie. So enough about my my own kind of bumpy journey back into sex after having a baby. I'm going to cover a couple of questions that I get a lot from women relating to postpartum sex. So one of the big ones is, will my vagina feel the same to my partner after a vaginal birth? And will sex feel the same for me? And to answer this question, I asked my husband, and in regards to his own experience of my postpartum vagina. And I had other women, some friends, ask their partners. So this answer has come from the male and female perspective. So So it's good to know that after a vaginal birth, your vagina might be a bit wider, which, yeah, probably you and your partner are both going to notice that in the first few months after birth. But as you continue to do Kegels, which is like pulling up the muscles in the pelvic floor and then releasing them and then pulling them back up, it'll help to strengthen your vagina and make it a bit more tight. It's never going to go back to exactly how it was before having a baby, but you can definitely help to tighten it up by regularly doing Kegels. And the changes in the vagina will become less and less noticeable. Both you and your partner are going to settle into, your new normal with the new state of your vagina. And in addition, it's good to know that it's super normal for some women to experience, vaginal dryness as those hormones shift. Usually, in my case, it kind of works itself out after a few months, but if it doesn't, go ahead and use some lube. Nothing wrong with that. And, beyond the physical components of sex and your vagina, you and your partner might experience some mental blocks. One of the big ones is not feeling as comfortable connecting to your sexual self when so much of your identity has suddenly shifted into parent mode. And again, this can happen for mothers and fathers, probably more so mothers, but dads can experience this too. And it can be tricky, to reconcile these two pieces of yourself. And because of this, it's normal for your sex life to go through a dry patch in the early months of parenthood, like I experienced. Just take it easy on yourselves. Commit to continuing to have sex every now and then, even though it might be a little bit awkward, and know that you will, find your way back to that steamy sexual connection. So a couple things to do to help with your vagina tightening. Again, I mentioned those Kegels. These can really be a sexual game changer because they strengthen the pelvic floor muscles that surround the vagina, making it tighter. And another cool thing with Kegels is it can increase the circulation to the vagina and the pelvic floor, which can enhance arousal and lubrication. So one way to get yourself aroused and ready for sex is to do a lot of Kegels. It can get you going. And so to do them, if you've never done them before, you can identify your pelvic floor muscles by stopping your stream of urine mid-flow and then release after a few seconds. And so as you're doing it, you just really focus on pulling the pelvic floor muscles in and up, holding for a count of 10, and then fully releasing to the count of 10. And then maintain, slow, easy breathing as you're doing each rep, slowly inhaling with the intake of muscles, exhaling with the release. And, I recommend doing 10 sets about 3 times a day. I've mentioned using lube about a bajillion times now. So go ahead, and I recommend getting an organic lube if at all possible. Get creative with positions. The temporary changes in your vagina can make positions that used to feel really lovely. They might be painful. They might just not feel good anymore. So go into sex with curiosity. Try out different positions until you find the one or the many that do the trick. And it's also important to let your partner know that you're the one that needs to lead the way with this, as you're the one that's going to know when something is working for or against your pleasure. I will say a lot of women find that doggy style postpartum feels really good. So give it a try. Consider amping up foreplay. If you've tried all the positions, nothing's doing the trick, return to the tried and true techniques of oral sex and fondling. Sex will eventually feel good again, but there's no need to forego pleasure in the meantime. Next, love yourself, mama. A transformed vagina, leaking boobs, a shift in identity, fatigue, seriously limited time to have sex. It can all lead to some really bummer thoughts about yourself. Common thoughts I had in that quote unquote 4th trimester, the first 3 months of my baby's life, were I am no longer a sexual being, but a bloated baby bottle. I can't possibly seem sexy anymore to my husband. I feel so gross. Why am I so sticky? My vagina is probably disgusting, but I'm too scared to look. I was really mean to myself. And needless to say, this meanness did not, enhance my connection with myself or my husband. It made me really withdrawn. So do as I didn't and tell yourself that mean voice is full of lies. Instead of allowing yourself to fall down the rabbit hole of those damaging thoughts, be really gentle with yourself, continually coming back to the knowing that things will settle down. You will reclaim your sense of self and sexiness, and your sex life will get back on track. It won't happen all at once, and that's okay. And instead of focusing on like what's not working, really try to focus on what is. Find those little things that make you feel good. Okay, so now I'm going to go a little bit deeper into, how that association or a shift in association with different parts of our body can impact sex. So a question I get a lot is, I've been avoiding sex because I now associate my vagina and breasts with my baby, and I can't reconcile motherhood with these shifts. Is there a way to shift my mind and body out of mom mode so I can enjoy sex again? So, when I was a few months into motherhood, my husband, Eric, and I had a big fight about sex, and not for the first time. Not surprisingly, he wanted more of it. As I've said a lot in this podcast so far, I really couldn't get into it for a while. And part of the reason was I associated my breasts with breastfeeding. And when I thought of my vagina, literally all I could think of was my baby's head coming out of my vagina. And so suddenly my erogenous zones had turned into mommy zones. And these significant shifts in perspective, suddenly made an act that I had always enjoyed feel kind of dirty and not in the fun way. And so to make myself feel better, I started rage journaling, obviously. During these journaling sessions, I would let it all out. I would say all the stuff that I wanted to say to my husband that I didn't want to say to his face. I would rage against my body. I was just mad at it. And one thing I also did when I would calm down a bit is I drew what I called my sexuality spectrum. And on one end of the spectrum was, I wrote, using my body to care for a baby, acts that I perceived as requiring 0.01% of my sexuality. And on the other end was, I wrote, using my body to feel sexual pleasure. And this would have to do with, acts that I thought required 100% of my sexuality. And I wholly believed that the dichotomy of that spectrum was accurate, and it totally screwed up my sex life for a while, because living by that model meant that I had to push through, intense mental, physical, emotional shifts anytime my husband and I wanted to have sex. Because I would have to get all the way from one side of the spectrum, from mommy mode to sex mode. And what I failed to realize was that what I failed to realize as I was creating that spectrum was that the act of breastfeeding and vaginally birthing a baby is a lot more sexual than I realized. After all, my sexuality is what led me to become pregnant. And birthing, it consists of the same uterine contractions that happen during orgasm. And breastfeeding causes nipple stimulation that releases oxytocin or the love hormone. And something I'll get into in another episode is that some women actually orgasm when breastfeeding. So a lot of those mothering tasks, experiences are so much wrapped up in our sexual self. Sex and motherhood mingle a lot more than we realize. And I found that exciting, but I think that idea can actually put a lot of women off and almost freak them out even more. For example, I had a client who felt aroused when breastfeeding, and she experienced a lot of shame around that. She then, developed really negative connotations about anything that caused arousal because it reminded her of what she called the quote unquote wrong feeling when she fed her baby. And this caused big issues when it came to sex. And so she's actually somebody we worked together creating the tips I'm going to give you in a moment. And these were things that we did to help her, restructure her beliefs around motherhood and sexual arousal, to help her eventually find her way back to enjoying sex. Something else that can turn a new mom off that I mentioned before is that shift in identity. Our society often paints quote unquote good parents as virtuous, wholesome, married citizens who, never curse and only have sex to procreate. There's very little room left for arousal, eroticism, orgasm. And I think that's so sad because sexual pleasure is an innate, healthy desire. It is something to be explored and celebrated instead of suppressed and shamed. But that takes work, because many of us have to reprogram our beliefs on having sex as a parent before we can enjoy having sex as a parent. So how do we start reprogramming that? How do we get to the place where we want and enjoy carnal pleasures as much as our partner does? So first and foremost, don't give up on your sex life. Just because it feels awkward does not mean that you should just never have sex again. It takes time to transition into a passionate, deeply, deeply pleasing sexual relationship with your partner after having a baby. So to do that, look at what your beliefs are about sex and parenthood. Like, where did they come from? Many times our blocks around postpartum sex were implanted long before we got pregnant. And so to remove these blocks, take some time to examine where they came from. So you can ask yourself, what messages did my parents share about sex? How did my parents navigate their own sexuality? What messages have I received about what it means to be a good parent? What societal messages about sex and parenthood have impacted me? Do I associate aspects of sex with traits I've been made to feel are inappropriate for parents to have? For example, do you think dirty talk, oral sex, masturbation aren't appropriate for a mother? So continue asking these questions until you have a solid idea of the forces that impacted your perception of postpartum sex. From there, you can decide what can be thrown out. For example, outdated ideas passed to you from your parents, the media, society at large, and then determine how you would like to perceive postpartum sex, because that's the thing. You have the right to create your own definition of what sex after birth looks like, and you don't need anyone's permission to live by that definition. So here's an example of a new definition. So I perceive postpartum sex as a beautiful dance between me and my partner that allows us to bond and to enjoy pleasure. Being a good parent means honoring my need for pleasure. And so awesome. Cheers to, a shift in perspective that fosters like unfettered arousal, rolling orgasms, shame-free, like this shame-free glow after sex. So work on that, on shifting your perspective. All right, next, tell your partner how you feel. So I can almost guarantee that unless you tell your partner what's going on in your head, you not wanting sex will make them feel rejected. Like there's something about them that's causing you to not want sex. Because most humans, we take things pretty personally, right? Especially when it comes to sex. It can be a really delicate topic. So just fill them in on the blocks you're having, why they're coming up, how you want to navigate them. And if you don't yet know how you want to navigate them, you can ask your partner, if they're interested in helping you in this process. And if they are, you can, read through or listen to these suggestions together, come up with other possible solutions that, suit your unique relationship. And this process, this communication can foster It can foster connection. It can repair rifts or resentment that might be caused by changes in your sex life. And an added bonus of this communication is that your partner will probably start to put less pressure on you for having sex when you're just not feeling it. So communicate. Ask to lead the way during sex. When you're first finding your bearings as a new mom who's also a sexual being, ensure that sex, really moves at your pace by asking to set the pace. Move as fast or as slow as you want. You can tell your partner how you want to be touched. Let them know when you're ready to be penetrated or, intimately touched on the vagina, or if you're just not ready for that. You can teach them, what kind of touch on your breasts does and does not feel good. And while I know that this instruction, that you're giving them might feel strange at first, it can really help you feel empowered in your sexuality and support you and your partner in understanding how to please this new version of you. And finally, take solo warm-up time before sex. So for so many women, our minds need to be aroused before the body can get on board. So before, you and your partner start having sex, slip away to the bathroom or in another private space, and you can start thinking about things that can turn you on. You can also masturbate a little bit. Take your time. Give your mind and your body time to warm up, and then when you feel that arousal coming on, then you can go and find your partner. All right, so those are a lot, I know. I find postpartum sex really fascinating, really complex, but something that is absolutely worth diving into and exploring as much as we possibly can.